there was a lot of sexual liberties going on in the house. Thomas knew that Doria had a lot of boyfriends. He kind of turned a blind eye to it, let's just keep the peace kind of thing. But it wasn't just the men that Doria was with. Samantha recalls, according to Bauer, that there were photographs of Doria with women taken by Thomas and hung up on the walls around the house. Hello, how are you? Welcome to our first episode of Revenge Review. Now, we are reading this book because we had just gotten finished reading Prince Harry's Spare, and we desperately needed a palate cleanser. That book, if you were not with us for that whole journey, it was extremely taxing to get through all of that book. It was just so much drivel, so many lame little stories, so much negative emotion, such mean-spirited attitudes. He never could see where his part was played. He could never understand. There was no introspection. In the entirety of that book, there was one line that he gave us when he was talking about the boys' school in Africa that he and William had gone to. And he said, it made me wish that I had taken my education more seriously. Out of 440 pages, that's the best we got. So the problem with the book, and especially towards the end, I just got this feeling the entire time, like, you're not telling me the whole story. You're barely telling me any story. And his version of every event was so vague and so nonsensical that it just seems like even he was sick of writing the book by the end of it. It was like, what can I say to just be done with this? And so I really wanted the facts. And I found myself the entire time reading the book being like, I know that he's lying to me, but what part? I wouldn't say that I believed him, but I started to question my own sanity. Like when he was talking about how much everybody hated Meghan, I just kept being like, did they though? Like, I don't remember hating her. And knowing full well that that was not a true statement, and yet finding myself thinking, maybe I don't remember correctly, I knew I was being gaslit the entire time, and yet I continued to question myself. So, Tom Bauer, in all of his genius, is going to bring us the truth. What I love about Tom Bauer is that he is an old school journalist. And what I mean by that is he tells us the story and he's not worried about couching the story in language that is going to be comfortable for his readers. What I mean is that it's like, you read people who wrote in the 70s and 80s, and the style of writing is very different. Now there's so much, it's like, I call it this, it's a school of writing called allegedly, where you're afraid to say anything as fact because you don't want somebody to come after you. So you might not actually say allegedly, but everything you're saying is in response to the objection you think you're gonna get. And instead of writing to the point, you keep writing to your critics. And so what I love about Tom Bauer, and I love this in a lot of older writers, most recently, I was reading Joan Didion's Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and I noticed this about her writing as well. She just told the story, and some of it was not flattering to the person that she was writing about. Not intentionally, but like it just happened to be the facts as they were. So she just is reporting the facts. And I thought, I love that. I love that you are just telling me what happened, and then I get to decide how I feel about it. And Tom Bauer, not to say he doesn't have an objective in his writing, he certainly does. He's trying to expose Meghan and expose the plan that Meghan had all along. But even as he's writing about each of the characters, he's just telling the story and then lets you make your own conclusion. So it's an amazing breath of fresh air. Something else that I noticed just right off the bat is how many quotes he has from actual people citing actual sources. And it is amazing. I mean, just in the preface alone, so many quotes. And okay, so anyway, we just got to get into it. I'm already 4 minutes into the video. Come on, we gotta go. So this section It's chapter 1 and the preface. So I'm just going to tack the preface on because I don't want to make a separate video for that. It's not long enough. So the preface in chapter 1, which is called Thomas. So you guys, in the first chapter alone, and I said this in my last video that was ending spare, the first chapter alone of this book has more facts in it than all the chapters of Harry's book combined. Harry's book didn't really have any facts. It didn't even actually have any quotation marks. Everything that he wrote was without quotation marks. It was like there might be a conversation, but there was intentionally quotation marks left out so that you would be aware as a reader that this is a conversation as memory only, but not as actual things that actual people said. And I really appreciate the use of quotation marks. It's balm to my soul. Okay, so let's just get right into this before I do. Please like and comment and subscribe and share if the spirit leads. Okay, now, the preface. He starts this book out by reminding us how much everyone loved Meghan. And personally, I needed the reminder. The preface reminds us that Meghan was immediately loved upon arrival. It starts with Harry and Meghan when they were engaged, and it's talking about her first introduction to the British people. And it talks about when she did that 6-month tour of the British Isles and how well received she was. And that she had a warmth, and Tom Bauer says that she was Hollywood at its best with her smile, her warm greetings. Everybody just thought that she was amazing. He quotes this one lady, this one older woman who had been in the greeting line, who said, "Meghan came over and I put my arms around her," swooned 81-year-old Irene Hardman, a royal superfan. "It's so lovely to meet you," Hardman told the future Duchess. "I'm sure you're going to have a lovely life with him. Look after him for us." And it's a really great quote that embodies exactly, I think, how most people felt about Meghan. She was a very warm person. He talks about how that day when they were walking, it was a really chilly day. It was December 1st, very cold, and several people asked Meghan, how is this compared to California? And she laughingly said, "Well, it's a little warmer there." And then there was this Australian student who was in the receiving line who was saying how cold he was, and she quickly took the hand warmer out of her pocket and gave it to him. And, so she was definitely on her best behavior. And people really warmed to her, and she was. I mean, I thought that she was so divine. I thought she was so beautiful. I thought that she was so classy. I loved her clothes. I love the simplicity of her style. And he says a lot of people felt like she really looked like this modern royal princess. And Tom Bauer is really forgiving in his description of her. He's not trying to throw her under the bus here. He says that Meghan was doing a lot of hugging, taking a lot of selfies, and posing for pictures with people, and that he says that she was unaware that this was banned by royal etiquette. So he doesn't say that she was flouting it or being irresponsible in her behavior. He just says she just wasn't aware that that was not to be done. So this preface is just a great reminder, a kind of a reset, especially for those of us who walked through Spirit together, that no, you aren't crazy. We did love the two of them. We did think that they were great. We looked forward to what we thought was going to be their life. And some of us have a hard time remembering ever liking Meghan. I know I do, because everything that's happened since that point has been so negative that it's just hard to remember that you really thought she was all that great. Anyway, okay, so I'm not going to belabor the preface. There's a little bit more there, but mainly the main point was, you're not crazy. You did love her once. But as he reminds us through Oscar Wilde, the truth is rarely pure and never simple. So what we were looking at was one facet to this fake diamond. And his final paragraph of the preface, he says, the royal family would soon discover that Meghan Markle's expectations and ambitions might be rather different from what they, and the enthusiastic British public, were anticipating. During those first blissful weeks, only hardened cynics asked whether it might even be possible that the 1,000-year monarchy could be jeopardized by this unknown American actress. So, there were savvy individuals who saw this for what it truly was. But I was not one of those savvy individuals, and I truly thought she was a nice person. All right, so now we get right into the Thomas chapter. And he starts this story off at the beginning with her parents, as one would. Now, I think what struck me, because I've never read this book. I've never seen any reviews of Revenge. I didn't really know that much about Megan. I don't know. I didn't guess I realized how her home life growing up was a little bit chaotic. And when I say a little bit, I guess I should say a lot. It was a lot chaotic. And I'm kind of starting to understand now why maybe she was a little bit nervous for the royals to understand exactly where she came from, because it was very disjointed, very, like Harry's always talking about how dysfunctional his family is. His family looks like an incredible, close-knit, loving, never had any problems family compared to Meghan's family. So we start off with Thomas. It was immediately apparent that Meghan was his favorite child from birth. She could do no wrong. And he says that it was love at first sight. When Meghan was born, he was elated to have a little girl. And the reason isn't that this was his first time to be a dad. He actually had 2 kids already. Samantha, who had been born Yvonne, but later changed her name to be Samantha, and Tom Jr. And he'd had those children. He'd had Samantha when he was only 19 years old, and then Tom later, a couple years after that, with his first wife. And he had gotten married to his first wife, not because it was a love match, but because he'd actually known her only a few days, and then she found out she was pregnant. And so he, did the right thing and got married to her. And then, of course, when you have the first child that you didn't want, many times people go on and have a second child to prove that the first child wasn't a mistake. And then Tom was born. But his first wife was, Samantha says, promiscuous. And that marriage did not work out. And Thomas, it doesn't seem like, was a real great dad either when the kids were young. Like, he really didn't want to do daddy duty at all. It was like he was in a real partying stage of his life. And so he was like gone around the clock, working all the time. And when he wasn't working, he was partying. He didn't want to be a dad. So at the age of 37, when Meghan was born, he was financially prepared to have a child. He was emotionally prepared to have a child. So that's what he wanted to do. And the other 2 kids had been, in his words, a bit of a financial burden to him. And this time he could actually afford to have a kid. So it was going to be an exciting experience, which must have been a hard reality for the other kids to see him loving on this new baby so much, and to such a stark contrast from what they grew up with. Because the way they had grown up was Thomas had divorced their mother. I mean, it was a very clearly not working out. He went to LA to pursue his dream of working on network television as what was he? He was a lighting director for ABC. And so he had been working on that dream, since he had been young. He didn't go to college. He went straight from high school into the workforce. He'd moved to Chicago. Then he met his first wife. They'd had their kids. Wasn't working out. He left and he went on to LA. She moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Well, while he was in LA, he finds out that the mom's not taking care of the kids. She's kind of running around. She's not really home. She's not using the money that he's sending for the children on the children. And so they communicate with the dad, hey, they're not being taken care of. This is not working out. And so Thomas sends for the children. But even when they're there, it's like he's doing his duty by them, but it isn't really like he wants to be a dad. About the same time, he meets Doria. Now, Doria is Meghan's mother. When he was working as a light director for ABC, she was a makeup artist in training. He was 34, she was 21 when they met. And it was just, again, love at first sight. He thought she was the cutest. And so just a few weeks after meeting her, he invited her to come and live at their family home. So he's got his 2 adolescent children and this new girlfriend who's not that much older than they are, to be quite frank with you. And so, as you can imagine, that's a very challenging dynamic. It was a challenging dynamic, but Tom Jr. says it wasn't a negative one. It was just, it had its challenges, But he says he remembers celebrating Thanksgiving. Doria's family came. It was very warm, and he said it was the kind of family he had always wanted. So you can imagine that his life had been full of upheaval up to this point with his mother. And so now they're celebrating Thanksgiving. There's a mother and a father there. We've got extended family. It was just, it felt safe. It felt good. But the safety was not to last, let me just say. Because Doria had a lifestyle that she had become accustomed to before meeting Thomas. Not a lifestyle necessarily, I don't mean of wealth, but like of partying. She smoked a ton of weed. Like, she wasn't giving that up just because she now had 2 adolescent kids in the house. And that presented its own kind of challenges. Thomas said that he had thought that once they got married, she'd settle down, wouldn't be partying quite as much, definitely wouldn't be smoking so much weed, but that wasn't on her agenda. Well, she finds out that she's pregnant. And I think that this is very, very interesting. They got married in 1979, okay? She gets pregnant, she ends up having Megan in 81. And at that time, people had, when they found out that she was pregnant, and they were married, and it was an anomaly. I mean, at that time, you just didn't have that many interracial marriages, and so people were asking him what color he thought the baby would be. Where have we heard that line before? From one Miss Meghan Markle.
Concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
So it appeared that she'd heard that story her whole life about when she was growing. I mean, maybe not her whole life, but she'd heard that story about how people had asked her that question. Maybe Doria had told her that people were asking that question. It was an uncomfortable question. And so now Megan thinks that that's a question that people would ask in this day and age. Okay, that was like 1980 when somebody asked that question, you know? People aren't asking that question now. But, you know, it's just like it's like the exact line that she said in the Oprah interview. People never asked her that. This is totally stolen from her own past. Anyway, Thomas says that he told people, I don't care what color the baby's gonna be. And that's not my concern. What do I care? I just am excited to have a baby. Well, okay, things don't work out for Doria on the makeup artist front. But Doria is, if nothing else, she's a bit of a hustler. Like, she's always looking for like the next thing to do. And she had done all sorts of things. Now, Thomas says to her, you don't need to do anything, I'll take care of you. You know, he's doing fine for himself. There has been this rumor that he was strapped for cash all the day long when Megan was born, but that's actually not really true. When Megan came into the picture, he was actually doing quite well for himself financially. So he tells her, you know, you don't need to work, I'll take care of you. But she wanted something to do with her time. Now, for a while, she had helped her dad sell what Tom Bauer would refer to as bric-a-brac. I'm not really sure what that is. I'm guessing just little like souvenirs and kind of junky junks, I don't know. And then she had moved around California. She tried to be a travel agent. She tried to be an importer. She tried to be a clothing designer. She just was really struggling to find a permanent job. Now, meanwhile, while they're married, Thomas says that she was employed by a boyfriend in Humboldt County to prune marijuana plants, and she would help him to process those plants. I had to read that section a couple of times because I was like, wait a second, boyfriend? But apparently she had quite a lifestyle far apart from Thomas. The marital problems were, I mean, the tip of the iceberg when it came to the family problems. Tom Jr. was smoking a ton of weed with his friends at the house, but it's not like Doria could stop him because she had her own crew up in the house smoking a bunch of weed. And sometimes even this guy named Jeffrey, who was a friend from high school, Jeffrey would be hanging out, the women friends would be hanging out, Tom Jr. would be having his friends. It was just a regular party over the house every afternoon. But the weed smoking wasn't Tom Jr.'s real problem. His real problem was that he was being bused to a school an hour away because of their integration policy, which would have been fine except for the fact that he was the minority and as a white student, and that led to a lot of bullying. And he was getting beaten up all the time. I mean, he was like this redheaded kid who was just sort of a target. And Doria kept trying to tell the school board, if you're looking to diversify these people's lives, like Tom Jr. is getting enough diversity at home. I'm black, Dad's white, like, can't we find another alternative because the school's not working out for him? And eventually they did regulate him to a different school. But by that time, the damage to his education was beyond repair. So he was having all of his own problems, but far apart from all of Tom Jr.'s problems. Now we've got problems with Samantha. So Doria seems to have had a soft spot in her heart for young Tom, but her sympathies did not extend to Samantha. Samantha and Doria, it seems like it was a really sort of aggressive stepdaughter, stepmother sort of dynamic. And again, Doria was not that much older than Samantha, so it probably was a little bit difficult. Samantha, though, was home all the time because Thomas worked constantly. And Samantha saw a side of Doria that Thomas could just sort of ignore because he had to work. Samantha told her dad, I just feel like I'm excluded in my own family. Like, I live here at the house. But Doria had recently, like one of her many ventures, this time she was like making jewelry, and she called the jewelry company the Three Cherubs. Well, the Three Cherubs were Thomas, Megan, and Doria. And Samantha was like, but why is it not the Five Cherubs? There's two other people living in this house. Like, you can't just exclude two of us. And then her other problem was that she said that all Doria did was party all day long. She's not picking up the house, but then she wants me to pick up the house. It's a lot of this like, Dad, your wife is the worst kind of behavior. But then again, Doria also didn't seem like she was super awesome at the role of being a mother, even for her own child. It would appear, at least from this reporting, that Doria wasn't really a natural mother. The kids would come home from school and there would Doria be sitting on the front lawn in her dressing gown, smoking a joint. She wasn't loving and she wasn't gentle, and the caring for the baby all day long was, not her thing. She just didn't really care about that. But there was other problems. All right, so we've got Tom Jr. and his weed habit and being beat up at school all day. We've got the stepmom, stepdaughter dynamics. I mean, they're just rearing for a fight 24/7. We've got a dad who is married to his job and probably trying to avoid home life because it's like such a hot mess all the time. We've got a mother who is really into the smoking of the weed, into the partying, not into the baby. And then we've got the fact that there was a lot of sexual liberties going on in the house. Thomas knew that Doria had a lot of boyfriends. He kind of turned a blind eye to it, let's just keep the peace kind of thing. But it wasn't just the men that Doria was with. Samantha recalls, according to Bauer, that there were photographs of Doria with women taken by Thomas and hung up on the walls around the house. I found that odd. So we've got the sexual liberation of Doria. We've got the weird photographs on the walls, and Samantha was just wildly uncomfortable with all of it. And she says to her dad, Dad, you're working all the time. Do you know what Doria's up to all day? Like, she's using you. You're taking care of her. You're financially providing for her, put a roof over your head. But she's got like tons of guys in and up out of this place all the live long day. You gonna do something about that? And finally, it just became abundantly clear that they were just on different paths. And it's really important to say here that Tom Bauer says Thomas is not bitter. Like, in his descriptions of their divorce, there's no rancor, there's no trying to throw Doria under the bus. He just is very factual about it. Like, we were just on different paths. He says, we were just on different paths, and he admits, I was married to my work, but Doria's fondness for marijuana, her sex life, and her antagonism towards Samantha, who had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, was what ultimately ended the marriage. And he doesn't even say in that list of things that one of the problems was one of the problems was Doria's mothering, although he does mention it in other places. Now, it isn't really surprising that both of these families, both Thomas and Doria, would struggle to know how to parent well, because we get some background on both of their families. And both of their families, it was just a lot of upheaval, a lot of poor leadership by the adults. We learn a little bit about Thomas's father. He was also a workaholic and a very distant father. Before the Second World War, Thomas's father, Gordon, had owned a gas station. And then he worked at a shoe factory. And then after military service, he comes back, and he was a printer at an Air Force base in Harrisburg. But that was a 52-mile commute every day from Harrisburg to Newport, where they lived. So he worked or he was driving. like round the clock. I mean, and it was just Groundhog Day for the dad all the time. And he would just come home miserable, and he would take it out on the family. Not physically. It doesn't say that he physically took it out on the family, but it was very clear, like, my energy's been used up, and I got nothing left for you. And so, and he writes that after dinner with his 3 sons, Thomas was the 3rd child after his brothers Mick and Fred, Gordon, their father, would go to his room to read pornographic magazines. And this was, I mean, everyone knew what he was up to. He'd excuse himself from the dinner table and then just head to his room, and no one ever saw him again, but they all knew what he was up to. That's wild. And the mom is trying to do the best she can despite her sullen husband. And she encouraged the boys to, just go out and enjoy New England's outdoor life. But that comes down to fishing and then just sort of trying to scavenge for food in the woods. So I don't know how much they were enjoying it or just looking for like tidbits to eat. She did try to tell the boys to get a good education. And the 2 older brothers, one joined the Foreign Service, and then Fred became a priest. But Thomas, he was a party animal from a young age, and he loved to chase. He loved to chase women. He was an altar boy, but only so that he could sneak the wine and get pretty drunk off of the communion wine. So, I mean, as you can see, he just was living a different lifestyle than, say, Fred the priest, his brother. But as I alluded to before, he ended up going to Chicago, and that's where he met his first wife, and that's where he got started in the lighting business. Meanwhile, mirrored to his chaotic upbringing, Doria was also being brought up in a really chaotic household. Doria's family, not surprisingly, had been enslaved in Georgia. Doria's great-great-great-grandfather had been enslaved. I think it's very interesting that Megan has a story in which she says that her great-great-grandfather, upon receiving his emancipation, renamed himself Wisdom, yet no record would indicate that that would be the truth. He kept his name. But anyway, as things went on, eventually, after many generations, the family ends up moving away from the farmland where they had been enslaved to some nearby towns. And Doria's father, Alvin Ragland, meets his mother, Jeanette. Jeanette already had 2 children, but she had been abandoned, and so she had her 2 kids, and she was trying to survive and take care of the kids as a hotel lift operator. So then Alvin and Jeanette get married. They then have Doria, and it wasn't a great upbringing because her dad ends up making a decent living in Los Angeles. He has an antique shop, and he did well for himself. And even though Doria and Joseph seemed that they probably had a fairly good education, it was there was upheaval because the dad was he was into a real fast lifestyle, like fast cars, flashy clothes, chasing women. And so all through their growing up years, she didn't have a dad that was super excited about being a father. And then, interestingly enough, Doria goes off and marries Thomas Markle. At the same time that their marriage is disintegrating, Doria's mother's marriage is disintegrating. So they're both going through divorces at the same time. And so they kind of come together and form like another household in which they take care of Megan. So it's not surprising to me, I think, that Thomas and Doria struggled to make it work. One, because their age difference was pretty extreme. It was quite a gap in their own ages. And so Thomas was ready to be a dad, whereas I don't think Doria really was. I think Doria was where Thomas had been with his first couple of kids. And so it was just a really problematic situation from the get-go. Once they decided, okay, this isn't working out, you want to live one lifestyle, I'm looking to live a different lifestyle, they decided that Thomas would watch Megan on his shorter work days. On his 18-hour work days, then Doria and her mother would take Megan, but every weekend Thomas had Megan. And so he was very much, I would say, a predominant caretaker to Megan early on. Later on, we'll hear that she only stayed with her father, but when she was young, her mother did play some part in her life. Again, there have been rumors that Thomas couldn't make ends meet at this time, but actually he was doing fine. He had 2 homes. He had a large converted barn in a very stylish neighborhood close to Hollywood Boulevard, and then he also had a small apartment near the ABC studios. So he wasn't doing poorly for himself. And Megan was enrolled by Thomas in the Little Red Schoolhouse, which, if you know, that was a favorite school among the Hollywood film set. And so, you know, she had a fine upbringing. And it's important to note that there had not been a lot of racism geared towards her in her upbringing. Thomas says he doesn't recall at any time there being issues for Megan when it came to race. Now, Doria says that one time when she was in Woodward Hills, somebody thought that she was the nanny. There was maybe some hurt feelings over that, but you know what? People have thought I was my kid's nanny, okay? Against all odds, my children have blonde hair and blue eyes. Their father's genes are fairly strong. My mother-in-law looks very young for her age, also blonde and blue-eyed. One time we were with the kids and somebody thought I was the nanny because I have dark hair and don't even look like I'm related to my children. They thought that my mother-in-law was my children's mother and I was a nanny. Okay, well, you know, okay, whatever. Not that I wasn't a little bitter. Mistakes can happen. It's not like that big of a deal. Anyway, Doria says that there was racism because somebody thought she was a nanny. But Thomas says he never saw it. And Doria, all their years together, never came to him and mentioned, hey, I'm not being treated well here. He says there just wasn't racism. And Megan, for all of her life growing up, never complained about racism. In fact, she made a point of saying that her father had made sure that she always felt very accepted and that their family wasn't anything different than anybody else's family. The color of the skin was maybe different than what she was seeing in her friend group, but that didn't make them different. And in fact, on one occasion, there were these little Barbie family sets. It was called the Hart family. There was a white family and there was a black family. And so for her birthday, her dad had bought both sets and then he had mixed the sets so that there was a white dad and a black mom, and then the 2 kids, there was one white kid and one black kid. And she writes, I know it's probably on her website, that it was Christmas morning, swathed in glitter-flecked wrapping paper. There I found my Hart family. A black mom and a white dad and a doll in each color. My dad had taken the sets apart and customized my family. So she sets up, you know, this story. Tom's recollection is different. Thomas says, yeah, I did that, but it was at a birthday party. I gave it to her when she was 4. We had a birthday party at a park, and he remembers another mom saying, oh, I've never seen one of those at the store. So that's his, you know, less worked up version of the event. But it did indeed happen. He wanted his daughter to feel like that her family unit was nothing different. And I think that's a really sweet story. But about 1986, Megan's getting a little bit older. Doria's kind of over being a mom. And quite frankly, it's just not her cup of tea. Now, I think it's important to note that at the beginning of this chapter, both parents openly agreed to spoil Megan. What Megan wanted, Megan was going to have. And if she cried, give her gifts. If she was upset, give her her way. Thomas did not think that parenting this child in any other way was acceptable because he just wanted to give her everything he felt he couldn't have given the other kids. So I'm sure that the 5-year-old who had been given everything she ever wanted probably wasn't very fun to parent. As Jordan Peterson likes to say, make sure that you're raising kids that you don't dislike. And I'm sure that Megan was a dislikable 5-year-old. So I'm sure Doria wasn't loving being her mom, but that was kind of a monster she had helped to create. Anyway, at this time, Megan really wasn't safe to go home to Doria after school because Doria wasn't always really around or available. So a lot of times she would go to her friend Nikki's house. Nikki Pretty was Megan's first and best school friend. And sometimes she would, more often than not, she'd either go over to Nikki's house after school or Thomas would pick her up and then she'd just hang around on set until her dad was finished working. It was probably really hard for a little kid to have to do that. And also, how do you have a 5-year-old on set? That's gotta be annoying. Well, Nikki's parents really encouraged this friendship. And Nikki has been on the record saying that Megan always wanted to be famous. Her whole life, that was her big goal. She was gonna be famous. And she just loved to be the center of attention. And she was dreaming of the day, one day she was going to win an Oscar. And she'd get up and practice her acceptance speech. And she just knew that someday she was going to be in show business. And Nikki says, I thought she was going to be too. That made perfect sense to me. She had the personality for it. So about this time, it's important to note that while Megan was pretty young, you know, she had older siblings that were in high school and going off and doing their own thing. So she doesn't have, her older half brother's not around. Samantha's not around anymore. So as she's growing up, in her mind, she's an only child. Like, she doesn't have siblings. She doesn't have anybody. And so later on, she'll go on to describe herself as an only child. To her understanding, she was. I mean, it probably felt very much like she was an only child. And it wouldn't have helped either that her parents kind of raised her as a separate entity from her other siblings. It was like them and then Megan. So even if they had been at the house, Megan certainly got special treatment. Anyway, they're not around, and she is being given everything she wants. And her friend Nikki said that Megan could be very, very stubborn. Nikki says, and this is a quote, "She was tough. If you rubbed her up the wrong way, she'd make it known with the silent treatment. There was a time when we were about 7 and I'd collected a bunch of insects and she didn't want to play with them. We spent 2 hours sitting at opposite ends of the garden with our backs to each other in silence. I'd always be the first to apologize. I just wanted to be besties again. She was stubborn. She digs her heels in the ground." And that's the last line of that chapter. So I think we've gotten a good picture of where Megan's coming from. And I think this is really going to shed light later on when we come to the wedding situation. Now, we know in Spare, she was real eager to keep everybody in her life away from her. And I think that it makes sense because it wasn't necessarily a super pretty, lovely, classy upbringing, especially at the beginning. Now, I don't know what her life became later. We will find out. But I think that it would be hard if you felt like you were with, like, you know, the upper echelon and you were a little bit ashamed of the chaos of your upbringing. This is why it's just so important for a person to just become really secure in who they are as an individual. People can't control how you feel unless you let them control how you feel. And I don't mean this necessarily in a stoic way, but if you give people all kinds of permission to stomp all over your feelings and make you feel super small and super unimportant, people will do that to you. There's something about small people that love to bully an insecure individual. And if you show your insecurities, it's like a magnet for all the people who feel bad about themselves. So project that positivity and project that assuredness, even if you don't feel that way. Because if you let people know that you are worried about something or insecure about something, it's just a magnet. It's a magnet for meanness. Anyway, I just wonder, I'm really excited about getting further into this book. I mean, just like that chapter alone was so informative. The next chapter, we're going to talk all about school and what school was like for her and like the lower grades. And then the next is college and so on and so forth. So anyway, that is our first episode of Revenge. It was very interesting to me and I cannot wait to get into more of it. There should be another episode on Friday. I will do my best to film and post on Friday. Maybe not. I won't have a chance to post it Friday morning, but Friday afternoon. Look for it Friday afternoon. Anyway, it was so great to see you. I hope you enjoyed that review of the first chapter, and I can't wait to find out more facts with you.